Now that you're an expert in timers, we're going to use this countdown timer to make a pretty fun egg timer app. I'm going to show you it in action here. So it looks like this. We've got our egg and we've got our slider at the top, and with the slider we can then control the time on the countdown timer. Then we can tap go and it will start counting down. You notice that the slider is disabled there, and then when we stop in the middle of the timer, it resets back to 30 seconds and re-enables the slider. And then let's just see what happens when it finishes. So the last bit of countdown, and then we get a rather impressive air horn noise when it gets to 0. So it should be a lot of fun. Just before I set you off, if you don't want to go online and search for the images and sounds that I've used, then I'll just show you where they are. So I'm using clipartpanda.com/categories/chicken egg clipart, and there's the egg image that I used. I just found that using a search on Google Images. And the sound is an air horn sound, which is soundbible.com/1542-air-horn.html, or you can find any other sounds that you like on soundbible.com. All right, so time now for you to give that a go. Best of luck. All right, hope you enjoyed that one. I'm going to start, of course, by creating a new project. I'll call it Egg Timer and all the defaults that we're used to. So I'm going to begin by downloading the sound and image. So there's my egg. Just going to click download there. And there it is, just to make sure it's in the same place. I'm just going to export it to the desktop and call it egg. There we go. And then same with the air horn. So I'm going to download it as an MP3 and I'll call it air horn. All right. Now I've got everything that I need. Back over to Android Studio, and let's import both of those to our raw folder, sorry. There it is, and then I just right click there, control clicked, and reveal in Finder. And then I'm going to drag my two new items right in there. There they are. Okay. And they've been picked up. Remember, you can use synchronize raw if you need to, if they're not there. Lovely. So let's get rid of our hello world and start by bringing in our slider or seek bar. So I'll put it right at the top and change the width to fill parent. Excellent. And then just double click and change the ID to timer seek bar. All right, now I'm going to bring in an image view. Where are we? There we go, image view to just underneath my timer. And I'm going to fill parent for both width and height. And then I'm going to change the SRC and click on the dots there and find my resource. Then I realize that I've actually put it in the wrong place. And of course it should go inside drawable. So I'm just going to drag that over if I can. Nope, it's not looking like it wants to do that. So let's just open it up in Finder again. And then copy it from raw and paste it into Drawable. There we go, and then synchronize Drawable. There it is. So now I've got my egg right there. Lovely. Next, I just need my text view for my timer. So I'm going to drag that in, and yep, I want to pretty much center it, but down slightly from there, I think. We'll play around a little bit with this till we get it right. And then let's just change the text initially to be, let's say we have 0 minutes and 30 seconds will probably be a reasonable initial time. And then text size, let's just experiment a little bit. And we'll try something like 30 SP. Yep, a little small. Go for 50, maybe even bigger than that. 70 SP. Great. And I'm happy with the positioning of that as well. You can of course play around with that more if you like, but most importantly, let's change the ID to timer text view. And then finally, we need our button. So let's just drag that in. Down there, lovely. And initially, that's going to say, go. And I'll call it the controller button, because it's not necessarily going to be a start button all the time. It's going to change around depending on the context of the app. All right, let's start by setting up the code for our seek bar. So in the onCreate method, let's first of all find it. So seek bar, timer seek bar is equal to cast it as a seek bar and then get it by finding view by ID, resources.id.timer seek bar. There we go. Then we'll set the maximum. And you can set this whatever you like, really. I think 10 minutes is probably reasonable for an egg timer. So I'm going to set it as 10 minutes, which in seconds is going to be 10 times 60 or 600. Then I'm going to set the current progress, which remember is 30 seconds. So that should set us up for our initial setup. Then initially all we want is for when the slider is dragged up and down for this label to update. So let's set that up before we do a test run. So we want timer seek bar and then set on seek bar change listener. And then we want a new seek bar on seek bar change listener. And lovely, we get all our default code for us. As before, we're not interested in on start tracking touch and on stop tracking touch. We can do everything when the progress is changed. So our first challenge is converting from seconds to minutes and seconds. And that's reasonably straightforward. We can create an integer called minutes, which is going to be the number of seconds in total divided by 60. And that, of course, is not necessarily going to be a whole number. But if we cast it to an integer like that, then it will round down. So what this will do is take the number of seconds divided by 60 and round down. And that's exactly what we want with the number of minutes. So that will give us the number of whole minutes. Then we want the number of seconds kind of left over after those minutes. So we'll get that from seconds. And this time we want to take the total number of seconds and subtract from that the number of minutes multiplied by 60. So you might want to just pause the video and look at that for a few moments if you're not quite sure why that will work. But just to clarify what we've done in the second line there, we've taken the total number of seconds, so that includes all the minutes, and we've subtracted from that the number of seconds already included in the minutes here. And that gives us the number of seconds left over. So this now gives us the number of minutes and the number of seconds in our progress here. Then we just want to update the timer on the app, which is here, and you may remember I called it timer text view. So let's first of all get it here. So it's a text view called timer text view. We want to cast it to a text view and get it using find view by ID, r.id.timer text view. There we go. And now we just want to update it here. So timer text view dot set text, and we're going to use the colon in the middle, and then we want to take our minutes and seconds and convert them to a string. So we'll do that using integer dot toString minutes plus the colon plus integer dot toString seconds. There we go. So that was relatively straightforward. I hope we can now slide all the way up to 600 seconds or 10 minutes, and that will then update the timer text view to show the correct number of minutes and seconds that the user has selected. Let's take a look. I really like how our app looks. Now there we go, look at that, fantastic. All the way up to 10 minutes. Now we've got a slight quirk that you can see there, that of course if the number of minutes or seconds is 0, then we only get a single digit there, whereas really you'd expect to see 00 because this is a timer. Now I'm quite happy with that over here with the number of minutes, but I'm not happy with that here with the number of seconds. So I'm going to add a little bit of code so we've got 2 zeros there, even though there's only 1 in our calculation. And as always, there's a number of ways that we could do that, but I'm going to create a string called second string, which initially I'm going to set to the value of seconds, but obviously converted to a string. And then I'm just going to do a check to see if second string is equal to 0. And if it is, we'll set second string to 0, 0. And then, of course, we'll display second string here on the label. So just to check there, you could of course have checked at the integer stage. It doesn't really matter. But let's just make sure. We should now find that our timer displays nicely. There we go, 2 zeros either way. You can do that for minutes as well if you like, but I actually quite like the single 0 there. But it does make me think that I should change my initial value from 0030 to just 030. Otherwise it'll be out of whack with the rest of the timers. All right, now it's time to bring in our go button, which remember we called controller button. Now I'm going to start by adding an on click. I don't want to call this start timer or anything like that because it's going to change. So I'm just going to call it control timer. Like that. There we go. So now let's jump back here and create our control timer method. Do that with public void. I've actually just forgotten what I called it. Control timer. And that will be called by a view, which we'll call view. Let's bring in the necessary code for that. Now I always do like to do a quick log whenever I introduce a button, just to make sure that it's working. Before we write any other complicated code. So let's take a look. Go, button pressed. Excellent. So initially what we want to do is start the timer. So let's write our code to do that first. So we'll create a new countdown timer. Now, we definitely want to count down every second, but it's not obvious how many milliseconds we're going to want. How are we going to get that? Well, we can get it from the seek bar value, because remember the seek bar is the total number of seconds. So if we're going to get it from the seek bar value, we need the seek bar value to be defined outside the onCreate method so we can access it from anywhere. So let's define that there, and then we don't want to define it twice. There we go. So now we can use timer seekbar.get progress, and that of course is the number of seconds, so we want to multiply that by 1,000 to get the number of milliseconds. Okay, now we can actually tap on countdown timer and then use the light bulb there to implement the methods that we need. So on tick and on finish, and then that will put the code in that we typed out manually last time. So that's a handy shortcut. So on each tick, we need to update the value of the timer. So we've already got some code to do that, and that's this code here. Again, I don't want to have code in my app twice unnecessarily, so I'm going to cut that and put it into a separate method that I can call twice. So I'll just call it public void and then update timer. And that's going to need an integer, which will be seconds left. There we go. And then we'll pop our code in. And of course now, instead of progress, we're going to be working with seconds left. And similarly here. And we need to access timer text view. So let's define it outside of all of our methods. So that should now update the timer whenever we call it. So let's start by just popping it back in here. So update timer, and then we're going to pass it the number of seconds left, which is just progress. And then here, the need is to update the timer again. Now we're going to want an integer. This is a long, so we're going to need to cast it as an integer, and we want millis until finished divided by 1,000. So that's the number of milliseconds, divide that by 1,000 to get the number of seconds, and cast that to an integer to allow that value to be placed into the update timer code. Now I've got a small issue up here, that when I copied that code up, it had the keyword final in it, which we haven't actually talked about before. Final is the way that we create a variable that cannot be changed. So Android Studio actually put that in for me here when we created our text view, because once we've found a view by its ID, we can't change that. We can't change which view that refers to. But here, of course, we haven't actually defined what the timer text view is. So we shouldn't use the final keyword there. We just define it as a text view and then update it here. Okay. Now I don't want to add too much code at once. So rather than playing our sound, I'm just going to log that the timer is done when we're finished. And then, of course, don't forget to actually start the countdown. So now we should find that when we tap the button, the countdown counts down, and then we get that message in the logs when we're done. So let's just move that to something simpler. Oh, that's interesting. So we need to change that to a 06. We'll do that in a minute, but let's just check. Excellent, that's looking good. 0. So a couple of things to note there. Let's just check and make sure. Yep, we have got timer done. But notice that it didn't actually call on tick the very last time. So that's going to look strange if we finish on 01. So we've got a few little fixes to make there. First of all, we need to update the timer text view to 0 when it's finished. Easily done. Just like that. And then we need to change it so that when it's 04, for example, let's just see. Yep. So we definitely want that to be 04, not 4. Otherwise it looks like 40 seconds. So we could put in an else here and change that to if seconds is less than or equal to 9, i.e. if it's a single digit, then we want to add an extra 0 in the front. So we'll make second string equal to 0 plus second string, which will just put a 0 in the front. And in fact, that's exactly what we want to do when second string is 0. So we can actually get rid of that first if statement completely. And now, if the number of seconds is less than or equal to 9, then we just add a 0 in front either way. Okay, so let's just run that again and see if those two fixes have indeed fixed the behavior that we wanted them to. Here we are. So once again, let's decrease. So now that looks a lot better. Great. Go. 2, 1, and we do get our 0, but you might have noticed a slight delay there. Let's just see that again. So if we go 4, 3, 2, 1, we then get a slightly longer second finishing off. Now, why is that happening? You may notice as well that when we tap go, it decreases almost straight away. In fact, it didn't decrease there, it jumped. Let's just check that again. So it starts decreasing straight away. So we really want to change that behavior so that it doesn't do that. So let's firstly see what's causing that. What's actually going on is when we start the countdown timer with, say, 10 seconds or 10,000 milliseconds to go, this first on tick isn't actually called immediately. It's called a few milliseconds after. So let's say we're looking for 10 seconds, then this is going to get called at just under 10,000 milliseconds, which means we're going to have, say, 9,800 milliseconds divided by 1,000, which then rounds down, because we're rounding to an integer, to 9 seconds. So that's why we get the 9 seconds straight away, and then 8 and then 7, and that's why we also get the delay at the end. So we have to do a slightly curious fix here, and that is to add, say, 1/10 of a second to our total countdown timer time. And that will allow for the time it takes for the script to actually process the first on tick, and then the delay will carry on and we'll get the output that we want, and everything will happen actually at the right time, even though it's happening 1/10 of a second later as far as the app is concerned. But let's take a look now. So we'll take it down to, say, 8 seconds. Now when we tap go, we get a slight delay, which makes sense. So it feels better to start with. And then we should get a smooth, there you go, finish as well. So yeah, that's a slightly odd fix that we need to put in there to make everything look better. We're still getting our timer done log, so everything's looking fine there. All right, next we'll change the log to an instruction to play the sound instead. So we want to play this slightly horrendous air horn sound. So hopefully you remember the process. We want media player. I'll call it mPlayer. And then we use mediaplayer.create. The context is this. And then we want r.raw.airhorn. There we go. And now we've got an interesting error here, so I thought I'd leave this in. If we click on that, you can see we get an error of cannot resolve method create anonymous android.ios.countdown timer. Now that's quite strange, but what's actually going on here is we normally use this in this context to refer to the application context, but because we're inside a countdown timer here, this actually refers to the countdown timer. So we can't use this to refer to the application context, which means we need to refer to that manually, which we do using get application context. There we go. So yeah, if you try and play a sound inside another countdown timer or something like that, then you'll get that problem. So you need to use the full get application context. All right, then it's just mplayer.start. Okay, so let's just check that, make sure I've got my volume up, and we should now find that when the timer finishes, we get our lovely air horn noise. Here we go. 2, 1. Wonderful. That's going to get you to get your egg sorted out. Brilliant. So we're pretty much there. We just want to do a couple of things. So first of all, we want to change the go button to a stop button when the countdown is active. And we also want to disable slider when the countdown is active, because we don't want the user to be able to change the countdown with the slider when it's active, which is confuse things slightly. Okay. So I think we're going to need a Boolean. Counter is active, and initially that's going to be false. And then when the user taps control timer, we're going to set counter is active to true. And we also want to disable the seek bar here as well. So we can do that using timer seek bar dot set enabled is false. So that will, whoops, set elevation, set enabled. So that will stop the user seeking back and forth while the counter is active. Now we only want that to happen if counter is active is false when the timer is pressed. So we want all of this to happen, but only if counter is active is false. So this will then start the timer, set counter is active to be true, and disable the seek bar. There's one other thing that we want to happen when that button is initially pressed, and that is we want to update the text of the button to say stop rather than to say go. So to do that, we're going to need to refer to the button. So let's create a button. Insert the widget code and remind myself what I called it. So controller button, very sensible. So we'll call it controller button here as well, and then in the onCreate method, we'll establish what that is. So cast it as a button and then find view by ID, r.id.controller button. So now we can use controller button to refer to that button, and we'll do that here. So controller button and then set text to be stop. Okay. So let's just check that all that works. Obviously, we need to do something when counter is active is equal to true as well. So that will be our last challenge. Here we go. So again, we'll tap go. So our timer's looking good. You can see our slide has been disabled. Brilliant. And our button has changed to stop. If we tap that, nothing happens because counter is active is equal to false. Brilliant. So what do we want to happen if counter is active is true? Well, we want to reset the timer. There it goes. So I want to first set the timer text view back to 30. I want to set the timer seek bar to have a progress of 30 seconds as before. And lastly, of course, we want to stop the countdown timer. We can't do that at the moment because we haven't called our countdown timer or anything. So let's fix that. We'll create it here. So countdown timer, we'll call it countdown timer. And then here, this is going to be our countdown timer. And then once we've given it a name, we can use countdown timer dot cancel. One more thing that we're going to need is to update the button text back to go again. So let's quickly do that. Controller button dot set text to go. All right, I think that's everything. So let's take a look. We should now have a fully functional egg timer app where we can start and stop/reset the timer as we like. So let's first of all just check that the adjusting still works. Excellent, and that looks nice. Fantastic. Let's bring it down to say 21 seconds. If we go, then we get this countdown and that's disabled. If we tap stop, that gets reset, that gets turned back to go. But I did forget something. I forgot to re-enable our seek bar. So let's quickly do that. Set enabled to true. Try that again. Here goes. So our countdown is working great. If we stop, it resets it back to 30. We're back to go again, and our seek bar is enabled again. And then if we tap go again, no, there's one more thing that we forgot, or that I forgot, I should say. Can't really blame it on you. And that is to set counter is active back to false again. Otherwise, clicking that button is just going to process these all over again. All right, fingers crossed I've remembered everything this time. So go, stop, excellent, and go again. Wonderful. Stopping resets it back to 30. And then let's just make sure that our wonderful air horn is still functioning. And actually, that makes me think, okay, so now that's gone back to 0, but it hasn't reset everything. So the user now has to click stop to get everything back, which really isn't great. There's a number of different ways you could solve that, and please do be creative there. But what I'm going to do is just run this reset mechanism when the countdown timer has finished. So again, rather than copy and paste the code, I'm going to cut it and create a new method for it. So public void reset timer. We don't need any variables being passed to it this time. So reset timer, so we want that to happen in two places. One, when the user manually resets, and the other when the timer has finished. So for hopefully the final time, let's just check it. That will have the slightly strange effect maybe of resetting it back to 30 seconds, but I think that'll be clear enough to the user because the sound will have made it very clear that the timer did indeed finish. So let's just make sure. Wonderful. So I think that looks fine. The fact that it doesn't go down to 0 and resets back to 30 I think does make sense. But of course you can change your app so it behaves slightly differently if you like. Great. So I hope you enjoyed that one. We now have our fully functional egg timer. We haven't quite left timers behind yet though. We're going to make a brain training app in a couple of videos time, but we'll take a moment out from that to see how to hide and show user interface elements to allow us to make our brain trainer.